Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Something to Talk About Vulnerability. Today's session, we're also going to talk about vulnerability and empathy and the intersection or crossover of the two. Let me introduce you to our guest today. You are familiar with Michael Burke because he's been with us for 3 or 4 episodes, and he will continue to join us. But today we have a special guest. We have Taryn Burke, who is a former college cheerleader and cheering coach who has transitioned her passion for movement and motivation into the mental health field, where she is a clinical therapist. She is also a health and fitness influencer, where she inspires people to prioritize their physical and mental well-being. Taryn, we're really excited to have you here today. Let's get started. I want to start with you, Taryn, and I shared with you that I'm not an expert on mental health or empathy. I'm learning from your father about vulnerability. So can you share with me your perception of empathy and how it intersects with vulnerability?
Absolutely. I think empathy and vulnerability go hand in hand, but I believe that empathy almost takes it one step deeper, because empathy for me is feeling what another person feels. And for me, I've always been extremely empathetic my entire life, almost to a point where I didn't understand why what I was feeling felt so heavy. As I got older, I learned that it was because I was almost taking on the emotions of other people. While when I look at vulnerability, I feel like that comes more from yourself, and that is more so you just being transparent, open, and just completely who you are and authentic to who you are at your core.
Michael, do you want to contribute to that?
Well, it's funny because that's the conversation that Taryn and I had sitting on my deck. I played for her part of our first episode, and she said something like, well, y'all didn't say that part of empathy is taking on the feelings of the other person. And, knowing Taryn, she does that naturally almost, I think. I don't know, Taryn, if it changed as you were becoming a therapist, because I think for me, I think Taryn was always able to do that. And I'm not necessarily able to do that all the time, but still think that I have empathy. And that's kind of where we had the rub.
Okay. Let me ask you, because, you and I have talked a lot about the fact that vulnerability is challenging for a lot of people, and that they have to oftentimes seek assistance, therapy, to be able to open up completely that way. I wonder how people react when they have finally achieved that goal and they are interacting with someone who cannot empathize with them, can't feel what they're trying to convey or express. I'm sure that has some impact. And I'd kind of like to hear from you about, one, if you agree that has impact, and two, if the inability for someone else to empathize not only has impact, is a complete deterrent, and how someone works around that.
Let me make sure I understand that. If the ability for someone to empathize is a deterrent, that's what you're saying?
Yes. Like if I'm being vulnerable and you can't feel me, does that deter someone for being willing to be open with that person? And if not, well, if it does, how do you work around that?
Well, it probably does. I would pass that to Taryn and see what her reaction is to it, because I think, it probably does deter people if they feel like they're being open and that person is rejecting their openness or not understanding it. Maybe it's not a rejection piece. Maybe it's a not understanding. I could see them saying, man, I've been really open and this person is still not responding. And maybe they're not responding in the way that you would expect them to respond because you're being open. So I would ask Taryn what she thinks about that. I would pass it. I'm passing.
I'm accepting. I
Taryn,
think
I can't see you. That's better. A
you
little
can see
bit
me.
more. That's even better.
Oh, on my screen, it's like a full wide view.
Okay.
Is this better?
This is perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I think that being vulnerable is really scary. If you're being completely vulnerable, it's like someone is just like looking at you bare. And so if that's not something that you're used to and you're met with resistance or you're met with someone being closed off, I think it absolutely can deter you. And on the other side of that, I also believe that when you're vulnerable, it opens up a space for the people around you to be vulnerable. But vulnerability has different levels and different depths. So I could look at something and say, wow, that person's being very open and very vulnerable. And for the person receiving it, they could feel like they're being met with someone who's extremely closed off.
I love what she said about vulnerability having different depths. Because to me, I think empathy has different depths. So I'm going to circle back to empathy. Because to me, I think I can have empathy or be emphatic when I am open to understanding what someone's feeling. And I don't always take on their feelings, but I am able to understand it and feel like I might say, oh, what comes up for me is the feeling of that was probably really hard. And I have some sense of the fact that that was difficult, but I don't necessarily get crushed by their emotion, but I'm able to open myself up enough to say, either ask a question to allow them to be, or to be able to be supportive of where they are so that they can share more if they're willing.
And for me, that's where I'm like teetering the line of, is that empathy? Because for me, empathy is so much about embodying and feeling the other person's emotion. So if you have to think yourself into feeling the other person's emotion, that almost takes away the empathy for me. It doesn't mean that he's not being empathetic or that he's not being vulnerable and trying to create a safe space for the person and make them feel heard, felt, and seen. But it almost just feels a little bit less like empathy to me, because I'm like, you're not feeling like the visceral reaction or the feeling of what that other person is going through.
I think I'm feeling it. I think there's levels.
Okay.
So for instance, in one of my warrior workshops, weekend warrior workshops, one of the young men, there was a father and a son there, and the father had gotten divorced, and when the son was a certain age, and this was like 20 years before, this was 20 years prior to the son coming to the training, and the son's work was around talking to the father about what happened to him when he left and the mother married another man who was abusive to him. Mm-hmm. And I could feel it in some sense, but not to the degree that he felt it and his dad felt it, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm saying I think there are degrees of the feeling. I could take on the feeling, the hurt, understanding the separation, understanding the anger that he might have had with his father. I was like, man, he must have been really angry with his dad, because I felt angry. So maybe I am feeling it. Maybe there's levels. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can imagine that oftentimes, even when you feel it, if you are not very comfortable in your own vulnerability, showing it is difficult as well. If you're watching someone go through something, I had an experience where I was with someone and they began to cry, and I had no idea why they were crying, and really was uncomfortable knowing how to respond to that. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should hug them or ask them why they were crying or just wait for them to tell me. It was an awkward feeling for me as well. And so I don't know if it was awkward for me because I wasn't willing to be vulnerable. I don't think it was that. It was that I think I felt like I couldn't fully understand what was going on with them and didn't know if I had permission to pry. Because when someone is vulnerable, they're wide open. And I always look at that as I have to be careful with them. I don't want to do anything in that moment that's going to frighten or hurt in any way the other person. So I just, I was curious when your dad mentioned to me that you thought that we needed to talk more about empathy, because I didn't automatically see the two being linked. I do now because I've done a little research on it, but probably obviously not as much as the two of you. And so I'd like to drill down a little bit more in terms of empathy. You appear to naturally have it. It's like a gift for you. But for those who don't, who also want to be, I'm probably going to say this all wrong, so bear with me here for a minute. If you're not blessed with the gift of empathy, then I think the closest many people can come to it is sympathy. But sympathy is usually for situations where you haven't been in that space yourself. So I wonder, I mean, you're kind of like the Michael Jordan of empathy. So if I don't know how to do that and I want to come across that, I want to show that I care, what do I do?
That's a really great question. Before I go to that question, can I circle back to something that you said?
Sure.
Okay. You made a comment about when somebody is vulnerable around you, you feel like you want to handle them with care and, treat them as if they're fragile. And for me, that brought up like vulnerability is such a strength. And I feel like it's portrayed as a weakness. And I think that that's why a lot of people are not vulnerable and are not open, because they're scared of how they're going to be seen, how they're going to be held. Like, what is the space going to look like if I show up vulnerably? And so you saying that just really kind of struck home to me, because I think there's so much power in vulnerability and being open and being empathetic. And the more that we do it, the more we can model to the people around us that hey, it's okay to be this way. I'm a crier. I've been a crier since I was a kid, and my dad can attest to that. And while I was growing up, it was so what do I do with this, right? I always have, and now I even warn people when I can feel myself getting emotional. I'm I'm a crier. It's okay. Don't be caught off guard, because I'm about to cry, and it's okay. We don't have to stop everything. I'm just letting my emotions out how Taryn lets her emotions out. And so, but I've had to learn how to navigate that, because I know that crying makes people uncomfortable.
Well, when I said it, I thought more, not so much about the other person being weak, but about me being confused and not, and legitimately confused.
Right.
So if I'm being vulnerable and I show my confusion, what does that do? Do I need to mask that? How do I process that in that moment? And so, no, but I think you're absolutely right. I think people do think of vulnerability as me showing a weakness. And it's not that at all. But for the people on the receiving end of that, particularly if you're not used to being around people who are vulnerable. You don't really know you don't know what to do. And this has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with you. You're like confused and, yeah, at least I was confused. And I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Maybe what I should have done if I was being vulnerable was to say that. I don't, I see your tears and I don't know how to respond. And that confuses me.
Yeah, and I think that that's like a perfect opportunity for so many people. Like when somebody is showing their emotions, whether they want to or not, I feel like it's an open door for whoever's around them to step into that space. And maybe that person has never had somebody show up in that space for them.
Right.
And it's not as if like they're already showing the emotion, right? So I think sometimes we don't want to pry because we're like, this is not my business, but it's already at the forefront of their mind anyways, because they're sitting in it right then and there. So I think that that's just like a perfect open door to walk in and say that, right? They're being vulnerable about how they're feeling, how they're emoting, and you can say the same thing. I see that you're crying and I honestly don't know what to do with it. How can I show up for you? How can I support you in this moment? What do you need?
You know what's funny? What's coming up for me as you all are talking is, and I'm not sure even how to frame it. I do so much work in my warrior work and in my circles that I do for leadership where I'm leading the circle, and in that circle, somebody breaks down based on what their experience has been, and they're a wreck from the standpoint of they're emotional, they're crying, they're feeling some anger, and they're feeling different feelings, and I can still feel part of it, but I'm not breaking down at that point. But I'm understanding where they are, and I'm trying to comfort them, and I'm working with them. But on the other hand, I could be watching a commercial and something touches me and I'm tearing up and people are looking at me like, well, why are you crying?
What is going on with you?
It's right. But I feel it. And I'm not trying to not feel what's happening in my circle. It's just that I think maybe, and maybe Taryn can help with this, as humans, we have there's different sensors maybe for us that touch us in a way that brings out that emotion, that kind of emotion, right? I think, Lynn, in one of the podcasts we did, I talked about when Coco Gauff won, and she ran up and hugged her dad,
right?
And I just broke, and I think people were looking at me like, "What are you doing?" or "Why are you?" And for some reason, that emotion between the two of them, not Coco Gauff.
I know who you're talking about.
What's her name? The other sister that hadn't won. She played for years and hadn't won. I actually could feel how many, because I follow tennis so well, I just knew she hadn't won. And to see her emotion was just, I think she won the Australian Open, and it'll come to me before we get out of this podcast. And it was just a beautiful thing that just tore me up. And, my people were looking at me like, Michael. And I felt her emotion. So I just think there's levels, and I think there's things that trigger that kind of emotion for each of us. Because I'm not trying to guard my emotion anymore, So I feel open. It's just that some things move me and some things don't. It's kind of how I feel about it.
I agree, because we're a combination of all the things that we've been through in our life to get to this exact point, right? So obviously you being my dad, that makes sense to me, right? Like if you see somebody winning a tennis match, you can understand all the work that they've gone into it, and then you're seeing the end moment and she's going to her dad. Yeah, I get it. I get why that would bring out that intense amount of empathy and feeling for you. So I think it really has a lot to do with like the sum of our experiences and who we are and what it took to get here, wherever you're at in your life.
Yeah, which goes back to empathy and being able to take on the person's feelings. And in some cases I can, and in some cases maybe I understand, but I'm not taking on the emotion.
Right. And
Well,
I think, sorry,
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to becoming empathetic, I think has a lot to do with understanding your own emotions and understanding like all of the feelings, right? If you've in general been closed off your whole life, it'll be a lot harder to embody and feel what anybody else is feeling. So just like practicing listening. I think listening is something that a lot of people don't do. When someone's talking, we're listening to respond, not just to sit and listen. So if we were to practice listening more often and then practice reflecting after we're listening and not just being so quick to be like, well, I have an answer for that. Well, what would happen if you just stopped, listened, and even gave yourself the opportunity to see what feelings it brought up for you?
When you were talking about the warrior sessions that you have, and you were talking about leading them, I'm assuming that that environment had other people besides you, the leader, and the person who was actually talking at the time. There were kind of other observers, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm making some assumptions here that the other people were there because they were working on themselves.
Yes.
As they were sitting and listening to Taryn, for example, emote, you had a reaction, but did you observe any reactions from the other participants?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and I have to believe that how they reacted, even if you were in sync with the person talking, the other participant's reaction would have been felt by that person as well, correct?
Yeah, I think it's an emotional, uh, it's an emotional, I don't even know what you call it. I mean, there could be 10 people in the circle and 6 of the people are crying and some are crying harder than the person that's having the initial emotion because it hits a nerve for them too. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful circle when you're, first of all, we try to create a safe container. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of work that we do before we even get to the real work of creating a container to make people feel safe, right? And when I say safety, safety is about trying to build trust within the
Mm-hmm.
circle so that, and typically the way we do that is we show our vulnerability right off the jump so that people understand we're not sitting in judgment, that we're there open and vulnerable with them. Yes. So to answer your point, there's always, I haven't been in a circle that we've done where it's one person.
Have you ever been in a circle where there was one person or more who didn't react at all?
Yes.
Something that,
I
yeah.
feel like you wanted to say something. I can feel it.
I do. I think something that people undervalue a lot is nonverbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
We are always, always, always communicating nonverbally. When you step into a room before you say anything, you've already communicated with your body language something, right? So sitting in a circle like that, there's ways that like even you guys are nonverbally communicating with me right now, right? Like I'm speaking, I can see you guys nodding your head. I'm like, okay, I'm doing a good job. Like I'm saying, I'm saying things, they're understanding me. But that helps people to keep going, to keep being vulnerable. You're leaning forward, your posture's open, your shoulders are back. All of those things are saying something, right? Versus the opposite. You can walk into a room and see somebody completely closed off. You can see someone mad. You can see someone sad. And they're not saying anything verbally, but your nonverbal communication is so loud.
Right.
And we forget about that sometimes.
No, I mean, just when your dad was talking, I looked up, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you to move over so I could see your face. And I could see it in your eyes. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that you said anything. I just saw she's got something she has to say. But I think that the reason that I'm doing these episodes is because this is my perception. There's so much communication that's not happening these days. And I think that's tragic. I think that's tragic. I don't know if anybody else does, but I do. And so we have a bunch of topics about things that I think people need to talk about. Whether they agree or not isn't always as important as they are communicated. So whether I agree with you, I at least now know where you stand. And I know how to work, collaborate with you. This topic of vulnerability is so central to communication. If people are not willing to show up and let me feel them, like I want to talk because look at me, I look like I want to say something. If I'm missing all those nonverbal signals and the verbal ones, then I don't know how we ever come together on anything. And I know a lot of people who struggle with vulnerability, who struggle with empathy. Those are topics that they just don't know much about and don't really want to know much about. And I want us to be able to inspire them to really appreciate the value that comes out of that. You made a comment earlier about there's so much value and strength that comes from being vulnerable. Can you elaborate on that some?
Yeah, I think because of exactly what you just said, of a lot of people don't experience vulnerability or empathy, probably because they never had a model of it, right? Or if they grew up and they inherently felt very empathetic and they didn't have a model or a safe space for it to be fostered, they probably shut it down and said, oh, I can't feel like that. Like, that's too much, or this feeling's too big, or everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm talking about my feelings. Especially men, right? Especially in Black communities. It's like there's such a huge stigma around what it means to be vulnerable. And so I think that you have to have people who are like leading the movement, so to speak, of like, hey, like I'm going to show up here and I'm going to be vulnerable. And it helps you create so many relationships, and not even just like surface level relationships, but deeper relationships, because you understand people, right? Every single person, everyone's going through something, right? And a lot of people just like to walk around like everything's all fine and dandy, right? But when you have a space where you can be vulnerable with people, you have people who now can support you. You don't have to go through everything on your own. You don't have to carry the weight of everything that can be so heavy on your own, because you can be vulnerable enough to voice it and say, hey, I need help. There's no
Shame in that.
problem in needing help. There's no shame in needing help, right? We're human. We're not created to do it all alone. So once you can become vulnerable and stand in your emotions, I think once again, it just opens up that door for other people around you to be vulnerable and to be emotional. I was actually talking to one of my friends the other day, and she was saying, like, I've become so like soft since I became your friend, right? Because I'm just a soft, emotional person, right? If I feel something, if someone's important to me, like I'm gonna tell you. And she was like, I've never had a friend like that. Like, you've taught me how to be gentle, how to show up for people, how to care about people. And she's like, it's scary and I don't know what to do with it, but now I'm able to build deeper relationships and foster like deeper relationships and just show up for people differently, because I am learning how to be more vulnerable.
I think Taryn's hitting on the nurture nature,
Mm.
right? You know, how we're nurtured and how we in nature is how we come up, so to speak. and how we learn and how we grow. She also hit on the senses, and I think I talked about the power of vulnerability is to be able to experience all your senses, and she started talking about listening and feeling and and I think even smell and touch are all senses that can help vulnerability. But one of the things that came up for me when she was talking, Lynn, and I don't know if we hit it before, was it made me think of the structures from nurture and nature, right? So the family structure is one of those structures where it can impede. Like vulnerability was never talked about in my mother's side of the family, right? And I grew up strong in the mother's side of the family, right? And there wasn't a lot of softness in my upbringing, gentleness, or it was more take care of each other, but not necessarily hug or, the softness of how are you feeling, right? And so when I had to do my work, and I'm still working, that's what I had to deal with. That's what came up for me and what that was like. So there wasn't a lot of space there wasn't a lot of, like, if you were crying, you were just, something was hurting you. And it wasn't like there was an emotional cry anywhere. It was you scrape your knee.
A physical reaction.
It was a physical cry, not an emotional cry. And I think if you had an emotional cry, they would have not known what to do with it. Right. And so my paradigm was, that's how I looked at life for a good period of my life. Taryn's mother came from something different, and I learned how to see differences in nurture nature because I had to see something through her eyes in order to be able to support her. And I didn't have that prior to that. So I would have probably judged it more. That's what my family were more. If you weren't like them, then they judged, so to speak. So if they didn't really get a chance to say, well, what's going on with that person and go deeper into that. The empathy, not a lot of empathy. Let me just say that. If you all are tracking me.
Yes, yes. You know what I was thinking about when you were talking about that, you've talked in the past about that example of the little boy. I think you said he was like 4 or 5 and he was in a mall and his mom was walking ahead of him and he was running and he fell and his dad, came up and picked him up and said, "Stop crying, men don't cry." And your reaction was, he's not a man, he's a little boy. But I think the nurturing starts at that early. And so when you've been conditioned and trained, I mean, literally trained to shut that off, don't put that out there, it's got to be a major lift of work. Give someone permission to go down, dig deep, and let it out because they've been trained not to do that. And it reminded me, I have a friend who's a family of, it was 4 boys and their mother left. And so they were raised by their dad. So it was a house full of no emotion, tough it up. Come on. You got to be a man, a guy. Guys don't do that. We're a team here and we're tough and we stick together. But what happens when you need to be able to open up? Because in that environment, you don't open up, not emotionally anyway. So it's hard. And it was hard listening to that and me trying to empathize because I don't understand that. So I was struggling with I could feel that it was a struggle. I could feel that, but I didn't know how to go to that place with them when we talked. And I think that's for me more of a challenge. I'm more comfortable being vulnerable than I am really being empathetic. And I know that sounds strange, but I was raised to believe that when people When people show you emotion, you have to react in a supportive way. And that's good when you can identify what it is they need from you. But when you can't, then you just stand there and look, or at least I stood there feeling foolish, like, okay, I'm supposed to do something, but I'm not sure what it is, and I don't want to mess up. And I guess if I were being totally vulnerable, I could have said that. I could have said, I see you feeling something. I want to be there for you, but I don't know how. What do you need for me to do?
I think that so much about, like, so much that I learned in school to be a therapist is so much of the work is being with somebody, right? And I think that's a huge part of grief, especially, is like, you can't fix it. There's nothing you can do to fix it, but you can sit in it with them. And so much of the time, that might be all somebody needs, is someone to just be in it with them.
The beautiful thing about, I hear you, T, on that, right?
Thank you.
The beautiful thing about, I'm not a therapist, but I've done a lot of men's work. I've done a lot of work on myself, right? And the beautiful thing about learning to do work is what is in calling it work, right? Is that I remember when Taryn just said about, or maybe Lynn, you said it about sitting in a circle and seeing someone's body language completely detached from the circle, right? And their body language, what I've witnessed, is the body language becoming more and more detached, the more emotional it gets, right? Those people who are vulnerable, not vulnerable, right? I can see them pushing away further, slouching down in their chairs, putting their legs out in the middle of the circle. And most of the time I'm dealing with guys. It's men's work that I've been doing, right? Mm-hmm. The beautiful thing about doing the work is that I can pick them and I can hit something with them that makes them change their posture. And maybe they're the ones that really need to do the work. And knowing how to help them, right, is a beautiful thing. It's part of the joy that I have. And it's probably what Taryn and I, we have a common ground, and hers is more what she does and her master's degree, and mine is just from doing the work. I know she has the experiential too. It's a beautiful thing to see when you're trying to figure out how to touch somebody. I know how to touch them. My empathy can go, okay, Joe is feeling something. Something's there. We're hitting a nerve, whatever we're talking about in that circle. And if I can say to Joe, hey, man, you all right? Sometimes just that, hey, man, are you all right? Gone.
That's enough.
Right? And it's not, and it's not about them being vulnerable. It's just that the pain that they tucked away comes because no one else, they haven't touched it before. Right? So the beautiful thing about being able to do work and help somebody do their work, Taryn's saying sit with them in grief. That's work, right? That's comfort. Sometimes in a circle when someone is detached, right? They're detaching because they may be thinking, man, I don't want to show what I'm
not trying to go there.
I don't know these people, right? So right. they're and not only are they doing that, they're fighting, right? And you can feel it. So it's a beautiful thing to be able to have done and have the experiences that I've had to be able to touch them, because I know even if it's just one little piece and they can get to it, they start to feel better. Just a bit. And I'm sure Terrence had some of those experience in her internships and in the work that she's doing. I mean, I can only imagine how many times she's done, run into that herself.
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the hardest parts about being a therapist is like they always say that we're the people that have to speak the unspeakable, right? We have to say the hard things because just like you're saying, like you just saying like, hey, are you okay? But I think for a therapist, it goes a level deeper, right? To actually sit and call out, like, what, to put a name to what the hard thing is, right? Because a lot of times those are the things that we like to tuck away. We like to act like they're not happening. Even with the body language, right? You can see at the moment that someone starts to retreat. And if you can stop them and say, hey, I can see you starting to retreat. Like, what's coming up for you? And sometimes that's all it takes, because we could be doing that unconsciously and not even recognizing how we're showing up in a space. But the moment that someone brings light to it, it's like, oh, this is what's happening. Like, now I can maybe sit with myself and process what is going on. And something else that I wanted to bring up earlier is I heard you mention, like, I want to be more empathetic, right? Like, I want to feel like I can show more empathy. And it made me wonder, like, when do you guys feel like you need to be empathetic? Like, when do we feel like empathy is necessary? Like, is there a qualification for empathy?
No, but I think that for me, professionally, I was in HR, and so I'm usually seeing people when they're in a very stressful situation, and part of the training was I can't get in there with them. I have to stay removed. At least that's the professional corporate kind of setting. But that's not me. So I would try to get in, but then it's a balancing act. How much do I get in? How much don't I get in? And I've always felt like I can't live there. It's interesting sitting here listening to the two of you, because you two are experts in this field. But most people that are going to be listening to these podcasts are like me, clueless, just learning the words and trying to understand what they mean, and recognizing that there's value in going there, but not even knowing how to do the work on yourself to make it possible to make it reachable for you. And so you all are so comfortable with it. Oh, it just flows. What does somebody on the outside listening to this show, how can they start this journey?
My number one thing is journaling. I think that every single person needs to pick up a journal and just brain dump. Like, it doesn't have to be like a guided prompt or anything, but our minds can become so loud, and it is so hard to sort through everything that when it's just sitting in your mind. But the moment that there's so much power in putting pen to paper, but how often do you ever just like sit and dump out everything that's in your brain? And I love journaling because it's a safe space, right? It's a place where, in my opinion, I can be the most vulnerable. I know that there's not going to be anybody else who reads that. I know that there's not going to be anybody else who can pass any judgment, and I can just be like the most vulnerable version of Taryn in my journal, because, like, if I can't even admit it to myself, how can I speak about it? How can I process it? I can't. But the moment for me that I can get it out into my journal, one, my mind becomes a lot lighter because I've given myself the space to kind of, like, quote unquote, talk through it. But also, and sometimes I never reread my journal entries. Other times I do. And I've been writing in a journal since middle school, and I have all of them to this day in this place. And I'll look at some of the ones from middle school and they're hilarious, but just being able to see the progress and just like the way that I've changed, the way that my thoughts have changed, the way that I deal with things have changed, is really big. So I say journal, and therapy, but journaling is safe.
And that's another topic that is not necessarily a part of vulnerability, but I'd like to touch on. So I am going to, before we wrap this up, I am going to extend an invitation to you, Taryn, to come back and talk about mental health in the Black community, because it is my perception of it anyway, is that it is still a topic that people shy away from. And I've had a therapist, so I know the joy and beauty of having that experience. But if you haven't, people are afraid of it. They're just, ooh, no, I don't want to go there. And so I'd like to talk about that. And Michael, I'd like it if you would be willing to join us, even though it's not necessarily talking about vulnerability. I think there's always going to be that aspect in that conversation.
Oh yeah, therapy is vulnerability.
In its truest sense.
At the highest level.
So would you be willing to join us?
Sure, but I want to double down before I say, I want to double down on what Taryn said about journaling, because she picked what I would have picked in terms of one of the first tools in my book is about journaling. And the story of my journaling is, Taryn said it's a brain dump. And I remember when I first started journaling, I had been in business for so long. That's why one of the things I want to talk about in the book is like the structures, like the corporate structure, the family structure, the different structures of nurture and nature, or nurture in real, right? When I started journaling, my journal, the first like 30 pages looked like a business letter. It was hilarious. I read it. There was not a feeling in the first 30 pages, not one feeling. It was like, today I talked to Lynn and Taryn on the podcast, and man, we talked about like vulnerability. And it was just like, and I read it and said, okay, Michael, that's how you think. How did I feel about talking with Lynn and Taryn? What was the feeling? Like, it's really exciting for me to have my daughter on here. And I'm feeling that, right? Lynn and I have been doing this for 30 years, having these conversations. And now, like, it's kind of public that we're actually doing it. But we can tell stories of sitting in snowstorms and just saying, you know what, well, let's just sit here and talk. And we would just talk, right? Being vulnerable, sharing, stuff that we wouldn't share. I mean, just like that. So to be here with my daughter is really kind of I feel the emotion, I feel the love, and I'm proud of her for where she is, so just that alone to me is if I was journaling, that's the feeling, right? This is different. Like, I never saw this 20 years ago, or when we were sitting around the couch and she was telling me, what was that show? She was watching the sports. There was a sports therapist kind of program, and she was saying something about maybe wanting to do that. I don't know, what was that show, Taryn?
I think it was called Psych.
Okay. And, Taryn lived with me during our time for her. I think she was 16 to the time she left to go to college. And so we had like a 1 day a week where we would do our little watching a show. She'd get her homework done and she would watch that show and we would talk about it. So for her to go the full circle and get her master's is really cool. It brings back a lot of emotions for me from during that time.
Well, for me, I've known about Taryn for 30 years almost, but I've never really talked to her. And it's just opening my eyes up to a lot of the people that I have as guests are my contemporaries. We've lived a minute. We've had experiences. Some of us have learned from them. Others of us are still learning from them. But it's always a fresh experience to talk with someone who is younger, who is growing up in a different time with a different environment, who can bring not only your God-given gifts and talents, but your training to the conversation. I so appreciate having you here. So now I'm going to be bugging you about, Taryn, can you come back to the show again? I want to talk about this. Taryn, can you join us? We want to talk about that. But no, I really, I think that it's important. And I also think that I'd like for our listening audience to be a wide array of generations as well, because I think the sooner people can learn about vulnerability, can understand empathy, the richer their lives are going to be. And you don't have to wait until you're in your 60s to finally get it. You can be like you and learn all this stuff early and have a much richer experience in life than many of us were able to, because we just have been trained and raised to shut all that off. Don't let that out. That's not supposed to be publicly displayed. What are you doing? And Michael is just the opposite now. It's like, okay, Mike, yes, we know you know how to go there. The rest of us are still learning. And so it's intimidating in a way, but in a good way. I think that a lot of people, I sit here and listen to you and I think, oh, I better not say anything because I don't even really understand this stuff. I understand parts of it, and I think the listeners are going to be very similar, but it's not a foreign language. It's not something we can't aspire to. And if the first step is journaling, I think that that's something that the listeners can do fairly easily. All you need is some paper and a pen or a writing instrument, and there you go. And so I want to give both of you an opportunity to kind of wrap up what you want to convey in this session with the audience.
I think my biggest thing would be to say that, one, like, it's okay to not be okay. Right? It's okay to not have it all together and to feel things that you don't necessarily understand, but there are also, you have people, right? There's spaces, there are people, there are things that you can do to work through them. And a lot of that comes from, the work starts with being able to learn how to be vulnerable and to open yourself up to the possibility that you could be vulnerable and it could go really, really well, and you could be met with kindness and love, and you can be vulnerable and it could go the complete opposite way, right? But that doesn't mean that whoever you were vulnerable with, that it didn't make some sort of impact on them. So I guess I would just challenge everybody to be uncomfortable. The growth only comes where you're uncomfortable.
Ooh, I can't say it better than that. But I think her piece about being uncomfortable, and if it doesn't go the way you want it to go, I think what I would add to that is you're still better from being vulnerable, even if it didn't go the way you wanted with the person. For you, you're starting to clear.
Right.
And part of being open and part of being is to clear some of the stuff that's in shadow, that you've been sitting on for years and years and years. And if you're going to let one piece out at a time, even though the reaction from the audience may not be so good, I guarantee you'll start to feel better.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join me and to really share your background and your knowledge with the listening audience. Again, I'm going to reiterate it because I want to drive this point home. I will be reaching out to both of you again to ask you to come on board and have another conversation. And it may not necessarily be around empathy or vulnerability, but I do think that whole mental health topic is one that we need to start chipping away at. And so I'd like for both of you to join us doing that. So, everyone, as usual, again, normally I say we're not experts, but today we were lucky enough to have one. The whole theme of this podcast is something to talk about. And I would really like to encourage you, when you turn off the show, to continue the dialogue with your friends. Until next week, I'll see you later. Bye.